My name is Ana Clara Ceccolini, and as part of the King's Alumni Relation team, it's my pleasure to welcome you tonight. Whether you're joining us live or watching this recording, thank you for joining our webinar, King's Expert Series, Thriving Climate Law and Sustainable Business for Good. The Philanthropy and Alumni Engagement work to engage and partner with King's global community of alumni and supporters, and we offer a range of alumni benefits, events online, on campus, and in your local community, as well as opportunities to give back to our King's community. If you would like to get in touch, you'll see our details on the screen. Today's webinar forms part of our award-winning King's Expert Series, exploring King's expansive and interdisciplinary thinking on some of the most important issues of our time. In the first part of this webinar, we'll hear from our stellar panel before opening the floor for questions. Please do submit any questions via the Q&A function. Without further delay, I'm delighted to hand over to our chair for this evening, Professor Jonathan Pinkse, Professor of Sustainable Business and Research Director of the Center of Sustainable Business. Thank you, Jonathan, and thank you all of the panelists for joining us today.
Thank you, Anna. So welcome everyone for this panel. So this is an exciting topic. I guess everyone knows about AI. AI is everywhere. We hear constantly how it is all changing the world. So as academics, we then ask the question, okay, what does that actually mean? Because we hear mostly about all the beautiful opportunities, but we also hear a lot of doom talking. So we try to now put in perspective a little bit, what does AI actually do to our world? And we asked several experts here to come up with their views on AI and sustainability, both social and environmental, from legal perspectives and from our business perspectives. So I'm very happy that we're joined by three experts from King's College London. Professor Sylvie Delacroix, who is the director of the Center for Data Futures. Dr. Clara Lopez, who is the deputy director of the Center for Climate Law and Governance, and Dr. Catherine Tilley, who is the Impact Director for the Center for Sustainable Business, of which I am the research director, so we're close colleagues. So I would like to ask each of you first to briefly explain a little bit what your work is and what your center does, and then we're going into a deeper discussion of the whole topic of AI and sustainability. Sylvie, can I ask you to start?
Thank you, Jonathan, and thank you for organizing this seminar to the alumni team. I think this is very exciting. The Center for Data Futures is basically focusing on participatory infrastructure over the whole life cycle of AI tools. And what do I mean by participatory infrastructure? I basically mean ways of making sure that AI tools are not just shaped by the designers, they are also shaped by users and those who provide the data at the heart of these tools.
Clara?
Thank you, Jonathan. Hello, everyone, and thank you very much to the organizers for having me here. I'm the Deputy Director of the Center for Climate Law and Governance, and at the center, we are a group of committed researchers to understand how law and governance, widely understood, can be used to tackle climate change. And we work around four main pillars, which are sustainable business and green finance, energy transition, environmental justice, and climate litigation and adjudication. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Catherine?
Hello, everyone. My name is Catherine Tilley. I am a reader in business ethics and sustainability, which is a core subject at King's Business School. I'm also the Impact Director at the Centre for Sustainable Business, which means I spend quite a lot of my time out and about actually talking to businesses about what it is they're really doing. And my own research focuses specifically on how they incorporate social or environmental considerations into their decision making. And that's really kind of quite a big chunk of how we think about the world from the Centre for Sustainable Business, because there's been quite a long tradition in management studies of looking at the case for sustainability. Why should we be sustainable? When you go and talk to companies, a lot of them want to act sustainably, but their problem is they don't know how. And so increasingly, we're focusing our agenda on working on the problems of actually making companies operate in a way that is more sustainable.
Thank you. So let's start our discussion about AI and sustainability. And when we think about sustainability, we quite often first think maybe about environmental sustainability, the data centers, the energy use, and the carbon emissions that are related to that. But of course, sustainability also has a social side. So I would like to ask from you, Sylvie, with the Center for Data Futures, that is really about the AI revolution, making the AI revolution more socially sustainable, and how data is created, managed, and used. But can you explain what that means exactly? What is then social sustainability in this context of AI? How does it involve people exactly? In what ways?
Thank you. This is a great question. And I think the good starting point is to start with a very simple fact, but which many people overlook. The fact is that AI tools are made possible by data. And for a large part, this data comes from us as we go about our daily lives, whether we're shopping online, whether we are going on social media sites, etc. Now, the fact that this technology, AI, is made possible by a data that largely comes from us ought to have significant consequences. And why am I saying this? I'm saying this because some people claim that we are now in the midst of the fourth or fifth, I lose track of the number, industrial revolution. Now, what's interesting about this analogy is that it's asking us to think back about previous industrial revolutions. Some were powered by water, others were powered by oil, etc. Now, the fact that this one, whether it's an industrial revolution or not, in a way we can bracket that out, but the fact is that it is powered by resource data that is largely coming from us, and that ought to mean that this revolution, if it is one, should be, well, it should be within grasp to make it more socially sustainable. And what I mean by that is the idea that if the resource that powers this revolution comes from us, then we ought to have a say in how this technology is shaped and for what uses, right? So this is a way of trying to draw attention to the fact that data is not just a commodity. So data can actually be leveraged as a tool for empowerment. And by empowerment, I mean different things. Yes, a lot of the discourse today focuses on economic empowerment. And yes, you can leverage your data for financial gains. But actually, if you only focus on that economic dimension, you miss a very large part of the story. Today, there are marginalized communities who are very keen for their data to be taken into account, for the data to be made visible. Why? Because they see this data as a way of acquiring a voice that they previously lacked. And so this is an example of a way in which data can actually be leveraged as a tool for social and political change, not just economic gain. And so that's what we've, for some years now, been developing through the idea of data empowerment structures. Yeah? The data empowerment structures are all about enabling groups of people to pull together either the data itself or the rights they have over the data to do a number of things. It can be that, let's say, it's a group of patients sharing a rare condition and they want to improve health outcomes. That's kind of classic example. But there are also examples of grassroots movements who want to improve the use of natural resources, for instance. Or it could be that you have a group of Uber drivers who want to improve their working conditions. And by pulling together not just the data, but the rights they have over the data, they actually have leverage, they have negotiating power, which on their own they cannot have. So I will stop here because I could talk about this for a long time. But this angle of social sustainability, what is key is to understand that really data as a resource has to be understood beyond its pure economic commodity kind of denomination. And once you expand your view to a political, social dimension, you understand that actually what's at stake today is fairly significant. And so that's what the center is trying to do, is to say, look, the fact that AI as a technology is powered by data opens up actually a lot of opportunities. And I'll stop here.
I can't help asking then, coming from a business background myself, how does that sit then with big tech that is driving the AI agenda? Because they seem to be using our data more for their own purposes and not necessarily thinking out about our interests as users.
But so it's all about saying basically, the GDPR came into the scene because there was a wide acknowledgement that freedom of contract was leading to very large power imbalances, the power imbalances between us, data subjects, and the controllers. Now, data rights were given as in a hope to address this power imbalance, saying you cannot just have freedom of contract, you have to give some rights to these people. The problem is, as good as those individual rights might be, A, they're difficult to exercise, and B, on their own, they cannot suffice to address this power imbalance. And so what we've tried to argue is that actually you need to go beyond the classic paradigm of individual rights for individuals, and you only focus on individuals. Because data, guess what? Data becomes valuable when it's aggregated. And so that demands a much more collective dimension, a collective perspective, which is lacking in our legal tools today. And so the data empowerment project, if you want, is a way of saying, actually, if we are serious about addressing this power imbalance, we have to enable groups to leverage the fact that, let's say there's 1 million people who join together, let's say a data trust, I won't go into the details, okay? They appoint someone to represent them, a data trustee. And they say to the data trustee, from now on, when we go shopping on Amazon, we want to sign in via our data trust. And when we sign in via our data trust, the data trust sets the terms and conditions according to which our data is collected. Now, of course, you're going to say, well, why would Amazon even listen to you? Well, they might listen to you if there's enough of you, if there's a very large number of people who say, well, if you're not interested in playing, in kind of having an exchange of views, then we could exercise our right to portability en masse and portate this data to an emerging competitor. Now, that might get the attention of even such a large corporation as Amazon. So this is the power of basically collectively pooling, not necessarily the data, but the rights you have over your data.
That's fascinating. My response would be, of course, then, yeah, but most people won't do that per se because they look at AI like that's a bit beyond me. The experts develop it. I can't really do that. So how do you empower people then through the kind of systems that you develop, the interfaces? How do you manage, let's say, to people to form a front against Amazon?
Yeah, so this is one of the key challenges, right? Is one, we start from a point of very low data awareness. Most people, when you talk to the average person on the street, first, the word data is very abstract. When you mention data rights, they look at you thinking, what is she talking about? So we're starting from a point of low data awareness and a habit of passivity. We've all been conditioned to clicking away those pop-up windows that ask us, do you consent to this data being collected for this or that purpose? It's annoying, and people have internalized basically a sense that they better submit, that life is complicated enough. You can't go and try and understand the terms and conditions behind each and every pop-up window. And so that is corrosive as an effect because it's actually encouraging this very deeply ingrained habit of passivity. So up against such a habit of passivity, I work on habits, that's why I mentioned habit of passivity. Mm-hmm. But up against that, what do? Well, you don't just say, oh, impossible task. You acknowledge the magnitude of the challenge. And you basically say, we have to start somewhere. If we're going to create a genuinely bottom-up data empowerment structures, we have to patiently raise awareness. So for instance, we funded an initiative in the south of England, which was a data trust that was proposed by two architects who came from a fishing kind of community that was fairly economically deprived. And they felt that they wanted to create a data trust that would allow for the sharing of both publicly available data and private data, for instance, about fishing yields and location of fishing, etc. And they wanted to connect that with use of public infrastructure to make a case for better investment in that otherwise under-resourced community. Now that was interesting. Now that's called the Brixham Data Trust. I think we gave funding to that initiative. Now I lose track of years, but at least 3 years ago, and it's evolving slowly because, of course, they've had lots of pop-up meetings in the street, meetings in the council. It doesn't happen like this. So you have to be prepared for a long-term investment and a patient work. I think we are going to need, though, an ecosystem of data empowerment structures where some of them are publicly funded too. So we know that there are failures when it comes to, for instance, the sharing of medical, social care, and education data. Many kids today, many vulnerable families fall through the cracks because of very poor sharing of this kind of crucial data. Now, this is an acknowledged problem. One of the things that has been aired is the idea of creating publicly funded regional data trusts that would act as defaults so that in the absence of choice, you are assigned to that data trust. You can always opt out and potentially join another one or be in none, right? But the interesting thing is then, okay, should you move to a default model where in the absence of choice, in the absence of action, you are assigned to a data trust? That, of course, opens the door to potential abuses. So you'd have to have very strong fiduciary responsibilities on the part of the data trustees, oversight committees, etc. So it's not all rosy, we have a simple solution. But I don't think we can afford to, in the face of the difficulties, just say, oh, too difficult, right? So I think we have to have a combination of patient local work, raising awareness, etc., and potentially also opening up conversations. I know that the government is interested in the power of these data empowerment structures, and there are various models. So it's a conversation that's still very much open at the moment. I think that I should stop here. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I'm now moving to Clara because we've spoken about the digital revolution and the data, but the digital revolution also actually has hardware at the background. A lot of the products that we use have all kinds of stuff in it, minerals, metals, they're being mined somewhere. And I think very often we don't really think about where it is coming from. We might think about cobalt, I think from the Congo, but that's about where it stops. Well, there are huge legal repercussions here as well, because when you start mining for these minerals, which we also use for the energy transition, that should be good. But is it really good? So can you kind of explain a little bit also this social sustainability topic, but then from more the perspective of this whole mining of these minerals that we use for the digital revolution?
Yeah, thank you so much, Jonathan, for the question. And I'm going to pick up on the first sentence that Sylvie said. AI tools are made possible by data, and they are also made possible by minerals. And this is the case of AI, but it's also the case of the green energy transition. So if we think, for example, about wind, solar panels, or batteries for electrical vehicles, all of those, our current technologies, are powered by minerals. So in 2020, the World Bank had a report, and they calculated that we need to ramp up production of minerals up around 500% by 2030 just to fulfill the needs of the green energy transition. So I think we need to think carefully about this because, of course, minerals are located in specific areas of the world, right? And mining has a deep impact on human rights and the environment. So what I do in my research is I look at the mining legal framework and from a holistic point of view. And I think this is very important because it's mining law that decides who extracts, where do they extract, and what are the consequences of extraction, right? So when we look at this legal framework, I think it's very complex and it's also multi-level. So there are many areas of law regulating and governing minerals. It's international law. And I think it's not only about protecting investors, which it is part of international law through international investment treaties. It is also about human rights treaties and environmental treaties. Then we have to look at domestic law and how domestic law translates those international obligations of the state. And we also need to look at contracts. So contracts between corporations and the state and contracts between corporations and communities. When we look at the legal framework in this holistic manner, I think one of the big issues that arises is that there's an imbalance of power that Sylvie also mentioned. So under international law, international investment treaties, investors in the mining industry are given some sort of superpowers. And I talk about superpowers because under these treaties, foreign investors can sue states directly, they can claim millions of dollars in compensation, and they are protected by very wide and abstract guarantees. Now, this is not the case for a local community or an indigenous community that lives, for example, in the lithium triangle in Bolivia, Argentina, or Chile, and is directly affected by mining activities. So the means of redress that those local communities have are not as powerful. And this is a problem that affects the whole legal system. And I think we should think about ways to kind of balance that redress mechanisms provided on the international legal framework.
So very much a similar question to Sylvie, to you then. So the kind of approaches that you try to develop, how does that then now enable the local communities to fight against the big corporations? How can they protect themselves in the disputes that they get? Because it sounds to me like the global framework is actually favoring the big multinationals that are coming in.
It is. But at the same time, I think local communities have a lot of agency and they empower themselves with the tools that they have at their disposal. So which are these tools? We can think, for example, about participatory mechanisms. And when I say participatory mechanisms, I'm using the term kind of loosely, but there are, for example, international obligations of free, prior, and informed consent. And this is an obligation of states that they must consent local communities, indigenous peoples, before they undertake any kind of project. There are also obligations of participation. And these are slightly different because participation is actually having a voice in how projects are going to be developed. And these are foreseen, for example, in environmental treaties and are implemented in domestic law, imposing, by the way, obligations on corporations. So it is under domestic law that we find obligations for corporations in relation to human rights and participatory mechanisms. And I think the most important part is also to remember that there are also very powerful legal entitlements. So local communities have a right to land. This is a property right, which is recognized under international law, but it's also recognized within domestic legal systems. And when we're talking, for example, about indigenous communities, this property right, so this right to land, has specific connotations. They are different because they are linked to the right to life. So I think from that perspective, communities have this kind of tools at their disposal and they actually use them and fight back. It's not always successful, but the tools are there. And I think we need to think about how states can actually give more tools, give more mechanisms of redress for local communities so that there's not this imbalance of power in the market for legal ideas. That's also important. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now I'm moving to Catherine because we talk about business here a bit as the big bad companies in the background that are doing this all to us in all kinds of different forms and shapes. And of course, well, we now hear about OpenAI. I don't think we did we know OpenAI 5 years ago? Probably not. Google, of course, we did know before, and Microsoft as well. And they're all there, heavily investing in AI tools, all kinds of solutions that will make our lives better, is the idea. But is it really making our lives better? That's what we're discussing here. What do you think? What is the role of sustainability in the decision making of such companies? Because with some of these companies, you do hear them talking about that as well. But how does that affect this whole rat race of making the AI revolution go as fast as possible for their own benefit?
So first, it might be worth just thinking very briefly about what we're talking about when we say AI, because I think there's a big concentration on the idea that it's all large language models, but there's also a lot of more focused machine learning that is dedicated to a particular industry or a particular problem type. And I think we do see them engaging in sustainability in slightly different ways. And I think it also indicates that the way of thinking about technology is very product driven. The big role in Silicon Valley is to be a product manager. Well, no, it's to be a venture capitalist, but then it's to be a product manager. So I think we see some products engaging quite deeply in sustainability. I was working recently with a startup who have a really interesting approach to machine learning for abatement of hard to abate industries. And they obviously, part of their business case is that they can say we save more carbon than we produce through our machinery. So you get pockets like that are very conscious of it, both in terms of the environmental impacts, but I think increasingly also of some of their social impacts. But you say rat race, I say gold rush. When it's a gold rush, the big thing that is dominating the way people see this is market capture, because the logic that has got people to where they are is one of a platform logic where your job is to get as many people as possible engaging with your product and make money from it somehow later. And when we are making decisions in that kind of context, well, I mean, all of us in our daily lives, when we're making decisions and we're under pressure, we go to what we know how to do. That's why we keep our keys by the front door or in the same pocket every time, so we can always find it when we're on the way in and out. And the kind of the scripts that are informing that decision making are about speed, and they're about return on investment. And sustainability decision making operates at a different pace and in a different structure. The sustainability team is often not part of the agile product development team. They come in later to mop up. And so although many of the companies have got some quite admirable sustainability goals, although we have seen a little bit of rolling back on that, there is a kind of separation between the decision making that is driving the core economic activity or core developmental activity and the decision making that is trying to help them achieve their goals. I think the second thing that we're seeing in terms of social and environmental sustainability is that their goals are really focused on what's called scope 1 and scope 2. So the actual carbon and social impacts of their own operations. So how do I reduce the energy costs of this data center, rather than thinking about the second order consequences, which is how many people are going to have to retrain as a result of me producing this product. And again, that's because ethicists don't work at the same speed as people on a product gold rush. And so I do see a disconnect between these starting to happen just because of the intrinsic structures and ways of thinking that pervade those companies.
So if I look at what they are all doing, these companies, they are a bit on two tracks. On the one hand, they want to do good for the world. On the other hand, they want to win in AI. So it does feel at times like when you look at a company like Google, it has some kind of sense of purpose still. It is not, well, is it just in it for the money? They seem to also have this other rhetoric that like they want to make the world a better place by disclosing information as much as possible. I think that's one of the early slogans. But that should mean that they do the AI investment in a more responsible way. But that leads to the question of, okay, is that then not slowing everything down? As you were just saying, is a different pace. People also talk about it like, okay, the US and China are driving the AI revolution and Europe wants to do it responsibly. Hence, Europe is behind because that is just not the same pace. Do you think there is still a business case then for doing AI responsibly? Could there be a European way of doing this? Or is it just lost against the big ones in China and the US?
Could there be a European way of doing this? I'm so nice to be sitting here with two lawyers because they could. It's really interesting. The US defaults to market as the way of regulating everything. We default to regulation as the way of regulating everything. As you can tell from my accent, I default to regulation or enlightened regulation as a way of approaching the world. I think at some point, people are going to realize that there is the need for a social license to operate. Back to Sylvie's point at the very beginning, these companies exist because we give them access to our data. And often unwittingly, I would say, but we do that. So we are in some way, at some level, complicit in this system. And so they exist without permission. as all companies do to a certain extent. And the question is, when and how might we withhold that permission, and what would the consequences of that be for those companies? And right now, that hasn't been tested, and we don't know. But I do think the concept of social license to operate, which is also really strong in mining, so it's really interesting to hear what Clara has to say about this, is potentially a critical one here.
Okay. Sylvia, I'm coming back to you. I want to look more towards the future. And I've heard that you're launching a data empowerment clinic. That sounds like a really interesting thing. So what is that doing? What are you doing in such a clinic? How are you basically connecting different people? How do you empower them to manage their data better? You've been talking about it already, but what does the clinic do exactly?
Yes, before I answer that question, actually, I should clarify because I realize I introduced things very quickly. So the Center for Data Futures is about participatory infrastructure over the life cycle of AI. And as such, we focus on, at the point of data generation, we look at data empowerment initiatives of various kinds. And that's why we've launched the clinic. The clinic is basically answering a very pressing need to produce graduates with skills to act as data stewards of tomorrow. To me, that's the missing profession of the 21st century. Okay, come back to that. So that's at the point of data generation. Yeah, so data empowerment structures. I want to emphasize, because it's easy to misunderstand, the Center for Data Futures and its focus on participatory infrastructure does not stop at the point of data generation, right? We also look all the way to the point of deployment. And guess what? At the point of deployment, we have tools like large language models that actually come with built-in participatory affordances. The only problem is they're currently very primitive. And they're primitive for a reason, because there's no commercial incentives for the moment to turn them into less primitive participatory affordances. And so the center is all about changing this, saying, actually, and I'm very excited about this, we have a narrow window of opportunity to demonstrate the feasibility and desirability of features. I'm focusing on LLMs deployed in primary care and education for the moment, but features that are there to incentivize participation in the longer term by professional users. I'll come back to that. But so now I'll talk about the clinics, because it's clear the clinic really sits at the point of data generation. And we launched this under the leadership of Suha Mohammed, who unfortunately couldn't join us. Suha is doing an amazing job as the Data Empowerment Clinic lead. And the clinic was launched on the 23rd with very much a focus on saying, we don't have time for long abstract discourses anymore on data empowerment. We have to answer at least two pressing needs. One is the universities are not producing graduates with the skills needed to act as data stewards. And the only way to do this is to do this through experiential learning. And so the clinic is designed as a way for students to learn through doing, by basically advising organizations of various kinds. It can be very large entities like groups of schools, even banks at some point approach us, not live for the moment, but all the way to small grassroots movements. Okay. And so what we're doing is to say to students, okay, you advise those entities, you'll be supervised. And in the process, you will be learning very needed skills to act as data stewards and fulfill this missing profession of the 21st century. Yeah. So just like doctors or the medical profession emerged at the end of the 19th century on the back of progress in the medical sciences, today we have progress in data science. Do we have a corresponding profession? No. And so I want to emphasize this professional element, because there's been a lot of mix-ups with people using the word data steward or data intermediary to actually refer to corporations, not professions. And so this is very important to understand. We need independent professionals who have the best interest of the people they represent at heart. Right? So the clinic is all about that, and also about creating a peer learning network between organizations. They could be corporations, they could be public institutions like schools, or they could be grassroots movements who are all interested in creating some data empowerment structure. So we basically saying, let's connect the dots. You know, I've been working in this field for some time, and what strikes me is that, you know, the lessons are not being passed on. And so we want to avoid that by basically creating peer learning among these groups. So that's what the clinic is about. And frankly, please get in touch if you are interested in this, because we are at the moment recruiting case studies for the clinic. So, you know, whether you're a large corporation or a city council or a school or whatever it is, it's a great opportunity, I think, to get free advice on how to do this.
I want to pick up on one thing, word that you mentioned, progress. And then I want to move to Clara, because progress and law, I always think, can law progress as well? The world is changing so fast. So for example, investment law, can that change to protect better these local communities? Can you see a way forward? So actually, the law is moving along with all these new developments.
Yes, I think definitely, and there are several international movements to move away from the old system and get a new system in place. So there are at least three possibilities looking forward. The first one is to just get rid of investment treaties and find something new, a new way to channel foreign investment into states that doesn't have such an impact on the interest of the state and the interest of communities. So that would be moving away from investor-state dispute settlement, which is this mechanism that enables foreign investors to sue states directly and sue for millions and millions of dollars. Some ways to tackle that would be, for example, investment facilitation, and this is something that states are already discussing. The second way forward would be to reform what we have, and this is something that it's also a long conversation. So, for example, we have UNCITRAL Working Group 3 that has is composed by states, and it has been working for long on how to adapt this system that protects foreign investors to the new reality. And there are many proposals there. So, for example, excluding certain industries from this kind of proposal. If we think of this kind of mechanisms, if we think, for example, about the oil industry, which can actually bring claims against states that would imperil the green energy transition. So there are ways to tackle what we already have. And I think the third thing that we need to think about is, what do we do with what we actually have? This is, I think, the role of lawyers and of us academics. So things that we've done at the center, for example, is thinking about how human rights considerations can be brought into the current system through legal reasoning. And we have also participated with the King's Legal Clinic in bringing third-party interventions before disinvestment tribunals. And what do I mean by third-party intervention? Is actually bringing communities to bring their claims and bring their positions before this type of tribunals that are focused mainly on investment, to give a more holistic view to the decision makers. And this is something that we've done in the past, and I hope that we continue to do in the future. So I think there's a silver lining ahead, and many people are working on it. So hopefully there will be progress.
Thank you. Catherine, talking about silver linings, we always talk in our office, because we're office mates, about the hype cycle. Is this not all a bit of we get carried away with the trend? Is it really changing everything? So when we look back later on, we might say, oh, you remember that time when we were talking about AI as if it was changing all the time? Or is this really a genuine transformation? So how do you feel that the whole world of business is changing under AI? Or should we maybe say, it's not as bad as people might say it is?
Yeah, it's a great question. As you can see from my plentiful white hair, I've been through more than one hype cycle and more than one kind of transformational technology over the years. And, I remember having these conversations 20 years ago about the internet. I remember having them 10 years ago about blockchain. And I think it's a little bit like, Lord Lever said, 50% of my advertising budget is wasted. I just don't know which 50%. Some of this is hype, but we don't yet know which bits are and which bits are going to be transformational. I was definitely one of the people that said, oh, this internet stuff, it's just a comms channel, isn't it? And yet I do think we have seen really profound changes in the way in which we live, work, and interact. And we've seen that play through society. a lot of the polarization of our political narrative has come from the possibilities afforded by the internet that we didn't even think of 20 years ago. So I do think there is potentially a transformation here. But what it will look like, I think, depends on us. I think, the way in which we choose to interact with it, the way in which we choose to regulate or not it, the way in which we choose to use, apply, support it, what we choose to collaborate with, what we give our permission to, what we don't give our permission to, is what will drive the nature of that transformation. And if we're not deliberate about that, it will be done to us by other people.
Thank you very much. So I've been asking my questions, but we have an audience. So I would like to open it up to the audience. There is the Q&A function, so you can type in your question in the Q&A, and then it will pop up in a beautiful document that I have here. So please do that, and I can ask your questions to the panel members. If you have a specific question for one person, do indicate that. Otherwise, I will just ask the question and see who will respond, which you never know with the panel. Here we go. See, they are coming. So a first question. Could you talk to the phenomenon of how AI is being used instead of other conventional activities, such as web searches, where there is a difference between environmental impact? Is it merely a case of convenience and lack of visibility of that impact? What carrot-stick measures could be used to divert this trend, or is it already too late? Who would like to pick up this question?
I think I can speak a bit to the environmental impact. And I'm not an engineer, so I'm not sure whether there's a difference in the environmental impact of using Google or using AI. I think all technologies rely, from my point of view, rely on minerals and mineral extraction. So from that point of view, I think the impact is there, whichever technology you choose. I think as a carrot and stick, there are many ways to tackle this mineral rush, and some people have argued to think about degrowth. I myself am not very convinced about that. I think it is a very controversial topic, but I do think that we need as a society to think of where do we put our resources. And there are uses of technology that can be very helpful for society, and there are those that maybe are not as relevant. So for example, if we think about electric vehicles, I don't think they are the future. I think we should think about collective modes of transportation. And I think it's the same kind of rationale can be applied to the use of technology such as AI and Google and you name it. So it's a collective effort to think about what is relevant for us as a society, and bearing in mind that resources are limited and the impact that we have when we use those resources.
I love my electric car, but now I feel guilty. Okay, I take the train as well. I use both. Although not all trains in this country are electrified. I'm always amazed how we still have diesel trains in large parts, which are very noisy, so they don't make you working on the train very nice. But that's besides the point. A very different kind of question, but that pops up, and it's probably for Sylvie. So when we talk about data, and that's being so important, so for people, what kind of critical skill of mindsets should people have so they can manage such data challenges? So either in business or as individuals, where do we need to change our thinking, basically?
Or thinking about data or
Yeah, data. So really just the fact that we need to now, we talk about data as if it's always a thing we worried about, but it's not really the case. So how should that be changing us?
Well, I mean, look, I don't know if I get the question right, but basically the idea is to say we leak data on a daily basis. I mean, there is not much we can do about this now. Basically, the world around us has been structured in such a way that it's very difficult indeed to live your life without leaking data. Now, the idea is to say, well, instead of taking a necessarily negative lens on the problem and saying, "Ooh, so we need to worry about privacy, we need to worry about the vulnerabilities entailed by or leaking data on a daily basis." And by the way, these vulnerabilities are significant, and I could talk about this at length, but I won't in the context of this question, because the problem is to be carried away with one lens on the problem. And basically, I think we have been very influenced by this privacy first lens at the expense of an outlook on data that also sees data as I was saying earlier, a tool for empowerment, where some people actually want to be seen. Some people want their data to be taken into account, right? And so from their perspective, this privacy first discourse is the discourse of very privileged individuals who, unlike them, do not feel disempowered or do not feel disenfranchised, right? And so actually an analogy that is quite interesting here, I don't know if you were aware that in the 19th century, the right to vote was conditional upon private ownership, right? Land ownership. And in order to multiply the number of people who had the right to vote, they decided to basically pool resources, in this case money, to acquire one piece of land, which was then cut into like lots of little parcels. And so instead of having one person who had the right to vote, you had, I don't know, hundreds of people who had the right to vote. Now, this is interesting because this is a mechanism where the pooling of resources was put at the service of an agenda of political empowerment. And here you could say this is not so different, except the resource that's pooled is data or the rights we have over the data. And it's also put at the service of an agenda of political empowerment. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I think it's important to highlight the dangers of falling prey to one particular lens on a problem.
Yeah, clear. Catherine, a question here, and I'm going to tweak it a little so it's also in the context of AI. Because the question is, how can companies balance short-term profitability with long-term sustainability, especially in highly competitive markets? And what is it? Did I call it a rat race? Yes, I was the rat race, you were the gold rush.
Yeah.
This is where we see that there's so much pressure on these companies to kind of have short-term profitability out of AI. How do they do this balancing act then between the long term and the short term?
Okay, so the classical finance argument here is that it's the long term that matters. And that, if you've got your discount rate correctly calculated, sustainability will pay for itself over the long term through reduction of risk, through the ability to innovate in certain ways, and through reduction of cost. So that's the classic financial argument that is pretty much always presented when you talk about how sustainability is put into a company valuation. The short-term kind of quarterly results face your shareholders thing is undoubtedly a source of huge pressure for the people who are doing that. And it's not every company. There are companies who've decided to report less frequently, or even to sort of say to their shareholders, we actually want shareholders who are in this for the long term, because that's how we're going to create value, rather than to sort of go, well, we're 1 point up this month or 1 point down next month, because that tends to be a very rapid response to nothing much. Sustainability does operate in the long term. There are certainly companies that are making short-term, long-term trade-offs around this, particularly in industries where the margins are structurally slightly tighter. And so it does depend a bit on what resources are available to you. And in fact, that's one of the reasons why I tend to be in favor of a certain level of regulation, because it creates a level playing field across industries.
Well, it's a good thing that we have some legal scholars here then who probably also say regulation is needed. I'm not sure if that is.
I feel I'm with the right people.
Because there's another question here that really speaks to that argument. So we've been talking a lot about the issue of corporate power in the sectors you work in. So this is also a key issue in health and environment. We know the policies needed to reduce this harm, but governments are not necessarily acting, in large part because of corporate power and influence. As you've touched upon, we have rights, including right to health, and governments have duties. And in this instance, I think they're failing in their duties. Can you please explain what might be the most effective routes to legal action here? So I'm looking at the two legal scholars here, I think, on the left of my screen. Who would like to take this question? Clara.
Yeah, so if I can jump in, because litigation is kind of one of my favorite areas. So I think there are many ways that we can use law as a tool, and we don't have to wait until the point of litigation. But as the question is asking about litigation, I think strategic litigation has been very successful so far. So we have strategic litigation at the domestic level. So we can actually sue states when they are not enforcing, for example, environmental provisions, if they are not complying with environmental impact assessment. We also have the power to bring cases against corporations at the domestic level, and this has been done both domestically and transnationally. So we have cases brought before, for example, UK courts against corporations that are incorporated here in the UK, but that have caused harm abroad. And there's an ongoing progress in this brought by these kinds of cases in the way that courts interpret a liability by corporations. So I think it's a very important field of action. And then we also have international adjudication. So we have two very recent examples of advisory opinions by the International Court of Justice and by the Inter-American Court of Human Rights on the climate emergency. And both processes were brought in their inception by communities. So, of course, before the International Court of Justice, it was the UN General Assembly. But before that, there were a group of students actually in Vanuatu that spearheaded the initiative. So climate litigation, even at the level of international law, can be brought forward by communities, and it can be actually very successful. And we have now the evidence of the decision by the International Court of Justice and the Inter-American Court of Human Rights.
Thank you. Sylvie, do you have anything to add to the legal perspective here? No. Then I move to another question, which is a bit broader and affects all of us, which I think is fascinating. What is the future of academics? How could academics save themselves from deletion by AI? And where's the position of ethics in this respect? So, how can you stay in your job? Any perspectives? Sylvie.
Well, actually, I'm happy to try and jump in on this one. So I love the question because, and I didn't really have time to articulate that much, and I'll be very brief. But I was talking about at the point of deployment participatory affordances. Now, I happen to work a lot on how large language models communicate what I call non-quantifiable uncertainty, which includes ethical uncertainty, crucially. And I look at this in the context of professionals like educators, lawyers, or healthcare providers. Now, what I find fascinating is that basically there's a lot of work right now that is focused on getting large language models to communicate their outputs with some measure of reliability, because we all know that otherwise they're dangerous to use, right? If you don't know how reliable the output is, you're like, oh. So this is fascinating research. And every time I dive back into it, because it moves at pace, I see that extraordinarily, like 95% of the literature is focusing only on quantifiable types of uncertainty. Yeah. And I'm like, well, guys, this is great. But in the value-loaded context like healthcare, justice, education, the non-quantifiable uncertainties, such as ethical uncertainty, are at least as significant. So we cannot allow this development of these tools to only proceed on the basis of quantifiable uncertainties. This is a disaster in the making. So how do you actually get LLMs to communicate, for instance, ethical uncertainty in a way that supports human agency? Well, you have to have these participatory interfaces. So you have to iterate. There's no uniquely correct answer to how you communicate ethical uncertainty. It has to be an ongoing conversation. And so in answer to the question that's asked about academics, I would say it's all really about how do you design those large language models in a way that maximally enhances all the various facets of intelligence, not just the cognitive, deliberative components that have had so much attention until now. And so that's what I find fascinating, actually, is that we are, I think, still in the Middle Ages when it comes to thinking hard about human intelligence and how it's improved or not by various types of interfaces, so human-computer interaction design. And so the role of academics, I tell you, it's far from gone. Why? Because we are only at the very beginnings of getting to grips with what it is to have, what is human intelligence? Yeah, and how does it vary? What are all the facets of it? Intuitive, habitual, pre-reflective, reflective, etc. So that's what I find absolutely fascinating right now. I think it's an amazing time to be an academic, actually. But only if we prepare to think harder about human intelligence and not just be completely fascinated by benchmarks for artificial intelligence.
I guess we see it already on LinkedIn nowadays. We get bored a little bit with the clearly AI-generated LinkedIn posts with the same tone of voice. There's no authenticity anymore. You don't hear the human voice anymore. And then, yeah, will we still read it because we read the same again and again and again?
I'd also say, yeah, we don't go to LinkedIn. I mean, there is a thing called LinkedIn Learning. People do go there for certain sorts of instruction, but I don't browse LinkedIn to learn or to form epistemically important relationships. I certainly work in a business school. I teach various aspects of management, all of which are about how people interact with each other at some level or another. Even accounting at some level or another is about how we interact with each other, how we express that financially. And I think if you try to take the people out of the equation, like what's the subject? What is it that we're teaching? How are we learning it from each other? And so I think I think AI can do amazing things in terms of democratizing access to certain types of education. It can speed it, it can scale it, it can do all sorts of things. But there is some stuff that we learn through apprenticeship and that we learn through being together. And I can't figure out how exactly we substitute that.
I think I agree, or maybe I want to agree because, of course, it's my own future as well. It's my own career. Clara, do you have any perspectives on this this existential question for ourselves?
Yeah, I'm a firm believer in the human experience, and I think we learn when we are with other people. And there's this uncertainty of how people are going to react and the ideas that they are going to come up with that I don't think an LLM can replicate. Maybe I'm too optimistic, but I think academia is here to stay for good reasons.
I recently watched the movie Her again, which is already years old, and it's fascinating because, of course, that goes in the other direction. And anyway, we've reached the end of this fantastic conversation. I've definitely learned a lot, so I would like to thank all three panelists for giving all your insights. Thank you. This is the round of applause, but we don't have a big room. Well, they're online. So it's clearly all very complex, and it's really the first steps. We sometimes talk about it as if it has been around for a long time, but we're really still figuring things out. And I think both from a legal perspective and from a management perspective, we heard how that might develop and what we need to think about. So thank you very much for that very rich conversation. So I'm handing it back then to Anna.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. It's been incredible. We learned so much, and there's a lot of questions in the chat we didn't get the chance to answer. We're sorry, but like we will continue and we will share more information in our follow-up email so you continue to research and learn more about the amazing work our academics do at King's. I just want to say a huge thank you to the excellent chair and panels, and to all of you for engaging in this discussion. We always appreciate your feedback, so you can complete our quick survey via the QR code on screen. We read every response carefully, and we try to incorporate as many suggestions as possible. For example, one piece of feedback we have received repeatedly is the request to host a King's Expert Series event at midday, giving our global alumni community see a better opportunity to join live. So our next webinar will take place at midday and will focus on population health, exploring why some people enjoy better health than others and the work King's is doing to try to improve these outcomes. But more information will be shared soon on our King's Expert Series website. And yeah, I would just want to say thank you again and have a lovely evening. Enjoy your time there and Merry Christmas and Happy New Year for everyone. We don't have an event until next year. So I wish you all the best until 2026 comes. Thank you very much, everyone, our panelists, everyone for joining. It's been a pleasure. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.